What if I told you that death wasn't always an ending, but a doorway to something far more extraordinary? Long before the rise of Rome, the Mediterranean was a tapestry of cultures who saw the departed not as gone, but as lingering presences, honored with rituals so vivid, they blurred the line between this world and the next. Picture this: families gathering not to mourn, but to feast alongside their ancestors, leaving offerings so specific, so intimate, it's as if they were setting a place at the table for someone just out of sight. These weren't simple ceremonies, they were acts of love, fear, and even negotiation with the unseen. And yet, today, most of these rituals have vanished from memory, leaving only fragments buried in the dust of time. Why did these practices matter so deeply? For ancient civilizations, death wasn't a full stop, it was a comma. The Etruscans built entire necropolises designed to mirror their cities, complete with streets for the dead to wander. The Minoans painted their tombs with scenes of joy, as if death were merely another festival. And on the island of Sardinia, giants' graves, monumental stone structures, were believed to house the spirits of heroes who could still sway the fortunes of the living. These rituals weren't just about respect, they were about maintaining a relationship, a bond that time couldn't sever. But here's the haunting question: why did these traditions, once so vital, fade into silence? Was it conquest, changing beliefs, or something even more profound? That's the mystery we're unraveling today. Over the next 25 revelations, we'll step into forgotten worlds where the dead were given gifts of honey to sweeten their journey, where mirrors were placed in graves to reflect the unknown, and where entire communities danced to summon their ancestors back, if only for a night. These rituals aren't just historical footnotes, they're echoes of a universal human longing to keep our loved ones close, even when they're beyond our reach. So if you've ever stood at a grave and whispered a secret or kept a keepsake to feel a connection, you'll understand the heartbeat of these ancient traditions. Ready to meet the past on its own terms, let's begin. The Etruscans didn't just bury their dead, they threw them dinner parties. Imagine walking into one of their tombs and finding not just skeletons, but entire sets of fine bronze dishes, ornate drinking cups, even remnants of food left behind centuries ago. These weren't accidental offerings, they were meticulously arranged feasts laid out as if expecting honored guests. And in a way, they were. For the Etruscans, death wasn't a solitary journey, it was a continuation of community, where the living and the dead could still share a meal. What's truly striking is how personal these banquets were. Archaeologists have found tombs with individual wine cups engraved with names, or platters holding the bones of specific animals, like a favorite cut of meat reserved for a particular ancestor. This wasn't a generic ritual, it was as tailored as setting a place at the table for a family member who just stepped out for a moment, and the paintings on the tomb walls. They're alive with movement, figures reclining on couches, raising glasses, musicians playing. It's as if the Etruscans wanted to freeze time, ensuring their loved ones would never lose the joy of celebration. But here's the twist: these feasts weren't just about nostalgia, they were acts of negotiation. By sharing food, the living maintained a bond with the dead, who were believed to hold sway over fertility, health, even the fortunes of the family. A forgotten ancestor might bring drought, a well-fed one, abundance. So every meal was a delicate dance, part remembrance, part bargain. And it makes you wonder, when we gather for wakes or memorial dinners today, are we echoing something far older? The Etruscans might not have called it keeping their memory alive, but in their own vivid way, that's exactly what they were doing. beneath the sun-baked earth of Crete lies a hidden network of tunnels, not for the living but for the dead. The Minoans, masters of labyrinthine architecture, carved these narrow channels with astonishing precision, not to carry water, but to channel something far more precious, offerings of wine, honey, and oil, poured like liquid prayers into the darkness. These weren't mere graves, they were portals where every drop held meaning. Imagine standing at one of these openings, watching golden honey swirl into the abyss, knowing it was meant to sweeten the journey of someone you loved. What makes these libation tunnels so extraordinary is their intentional design. Some twist and turn like miniature rivers, mirroring the Minoans' belief in an underworld waterway, a celestial counterpart to Crete's azure seas. Archaeologists have found traces of olive oil still clinging to the walls centuries later, suggesting rituals repeated over generations, and the choice of liquids was no accident. Wine symbolized blood and vitality, honey embodied immortality, and oil, a staple of Mediterranean life, represented purification. Together, they formed a sacred trinity, nourishing the dead as they once nourished the living. But here's the haunting detail: these tunnels weren't just functional, they were personal. Some graves feature multiple channels, as if each family member had their own conduit to the afterlife. Others bear marks where cups were ritually shattered after pouring, a symbolic breaking of the boundary between worlds. And in certain tombs, the tunnels align with solstice sunbeams, flooding the depths with light at specific times of year. Were the Minoans timing their offerings to celestial events, syncing their grief with the cosmos? Perhaps the most poignant discovery is how these rituals evolved. Early tunnels are simple, but over time they grow elaborate, some even decorated with carvings of boats, as if the dead needed vessels to navigate their liquid path. It's a reminder that for the Minoans, death wasn't static. It was a voyage, and every offering was a provision for the journey. When we toss coins into fountains today, making wishes as they sink, we're not so far removed from those who poured honey into the earth, whispering prayers for safe passage. The mediums change, but the longing remains the same: to reach beyond the veil and send love where our hands cannot follow. In the quiet corners of Phoenician homes, beneath the very floors where families cooked and laughed, slept the smallest members of their households, not in cradles, but in the embrace of large clay jars. These weren't mere containers, they were wombs of earth, cradling infants and young children in a final, tender act of protection. Picture a mother carefully placing her child inside an amphora, tucking a favorite toy beside them, a tiny clay horse or a string of beads, before sealing the vessel with a lid. This wasn't abandonment, it was a sacred homecoming, a belief that the earth, like a mother, would hold what the family could no longer. What's most striking about these burials is their intimacy. Unlike grand tombs for adults, these jars were often nestled directly beneath living spaces, as if the child were still part of daily life. Archaeologists have found amphorae tucked under courtyards, near hearths, even beneath thresholds, places where the family would pass constantly, keeping the child's presence woven into the rhythm of the home. Some jars bear traces of ochre, a pigment linked to rebirth, while others contain amulets shaped like eyes or hands, talismans meant to guard vulnerable souls in the afterlife. These details reveal a profound understanding of innocence. The Phoenicians saw children not as lesser beings, but as spirits needing extra care to navigate the unknown. But the practice goes deeper than sentiment. The choice of amphorae vessels, typically used for storing grain, wine, or oil, was loaded with symbolism. Just as these jars preserved life's essentials, they now safeguarded the most precious cargo of all. The curvature of the pottery mimicked the protective curve of a mother's body, while the narrow opening suggested a threshold between worlds. And the gifts left inside, they tell stories without words. A seashell might represent the nearby Mediterranean, a lullaby of waves forever echoing in the child's ears. A terracotta rattle could hint at a parent's hope that laughter might follow their little one into the dark. Perhaps the most poignant discovery is how these burials evolved over time. Early examples are simple, but later ones show intricate care, jars painted with protective symbols or clustered together in nurseries beneath temples, as if the community collectively mourned its youngest. This shift suggests a growing belief that children held a unique spiritual role, perhaps as intermediaries between worlds. Unlike the Etruscans' feasts or the Minoans' liquid offerings, the Phoenicians' ritual was quiet, domestic, a private grief transformed into a quiet act of trust. When we today bury loved ones with photographs or letters, we're echoing that same impulse to send something of the heart into the unseen, a love note folded into eternity's pocket. Rising like silent sentinels from the rugged landscapes of Sardinia, the Nuragic stone giants stand with hollow eyes that seem to pierce through time. These towering figures, some reaching over 2.5 meters tall, weren't just sculptures, they were guardians of the dead, carved from the island's very bedrock and placed near tombs with deliberate reverence. Imagine approaching one of these massive statues, its weathered features still bearing traces of red ochre, its empty sockets staring past you into some unseen realm. Were they meant to frighten away trespassers, or did they serve as vessels for the ancestors themselves? What makes these figures so compelling is their duality, both imposing and deeply human. Unlike the abstract monuments of other cultures, Nuragic giants often feature intricate details, curved bows slung across their backs, carved daggers at their belts, even subtle smiles that soften their stern presence. Archaeologists have found that some were positioned in pairs, flanking tomb entrances like eternal gatekeepers, while others stood alone on high ground, surveying the land as if keeping watch over the living and the dead alike. The hollow eyes, once likely filled with precious stones or shells, suggest a belief that these figures could see beyond the physical world, perhaps acting as conduits for communication between realms. But here's the mystery: these giants weren't just passive watchers. Many were designed with openings in their backs or heads, possibly used to pour libations or insert offerings directly into the stone. It's as if the Neuragic people saw these statues as living intermediaries capable of carrying gifts or warnings to the other side. Some tombs even contain smaller versions of the giants, placed alongside the deceased as personal protectors for the afterlife. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was a tactile connection to the unseen, a way to bridge the gap between the tangible and the eternal, the most haunting aspect. These giants evolved over centuries. Early versions are crude and blocky, but later ones show astonishing artistry, flowing capes, detailed weaponry, even postures that imply movement. One theory suggests they represent deified ancestors, their stone forms growing more refined as the Nuragic people's relationship with death deepened. Others believe they embodied collective memory, with each new carving adding to a lineage of guardianship. When lightning strikes the Sardinian hills today, illuminating these ancient figures in flashes of eerie light, it's easy to wonder if the old beliefs were onto something. That stone, when shaped by human hands and hearts, might just hold more than we can see. Deep in the limestone caves of ancient Iberia, the dead were laid to rest in a posture we all know, intimately curled as if sleeping, knees drawn close, hands tucked beneath chins, mirroring the very shape of life before birth. These weren't random placements, they were deliberate acts of returning the departed to the earth's womb, where darkness and silence cradled them like the beginning they once knew. Picture the journey, mourners carrying their loved ones into the cool, echoing chambers, guided only by flickering torchlight, stepping deeper into the belly of the world to leave behind not just a body but a promise. What sets these burials apart is their raw simplicity. Unlike the grand tombs of other Mediterranean cultures, Iberian cave burials required no cut stone or elaborate carvings, just the natural architecture of the earth itself. Some caves held single occupants, while others became family crypts over generations, with bones carefully arranged to make space for new arrivals. Archaeologists have found traces of woven reed mats beneath skeletons, hinting at tenderness in these goodbyes, as if the dead were being tucked into beds rather than graves. And the fetal position, it's no accident. Across cultures, this pose echoes renewal, the seed waiting to sprout, the child ready to be reborn. For the Iberians, caves may have been thresholds, not endpoints. But here's the fascinating twist. These caves weren't chosen just for symbolism. Many were selected for their acoustics. In the stillness, dripping water or distant echoes might have sounded like whispers from the other side. Some caverns feature natural shafts where sunlight penetrates at certain times of year, bathing bones in fleeting light, a phenomenon that could have been seen as the dead answering the living. And then there's the proximity to water. Underground streams often run near these burial sites, their unseen flow mirroring the Iberian belief in souls journeying beneath the surface. The most poignant detail, these caves often contained personal items so ordinary they ache with familiarity: a cracked clay cup, a worn bone comb, a handful of acorns. Not treasures, but tokens of daily life, as if the deceased might need them wherever they were going. One burial even held a small basket of snails, perhaps a favorite food for the afterlife. These choices reveal a profound intimacy. Death wasn't a grand departure, but a quiet continuation. When we today choose to bury loved ones with photographs or wedding rings, we're reaching for the same comfort, the sense that some bonds can't be broken, even by the dark. Why caves over graves? The answer might lie in the land itself. Iberia's rugged terrain, with its hidden grottos and winding tunnels, offered natural sanctuaries that felt alive with mystery. To place the dead, there was to trust them to the earth's oldest keepers. Unlike constructed tombs, which declare human mastery over death, these caves whispered of surrender, an acknowledgement that some journeys require returning to the dark before anything can begin again. The glow of hammered gold catching firelight, a face frozen in eternal stillness. This was how the Mycenaean elite chose to meet eternity. In the shadowy tombs of ancient Greece, archaeologists have uncovered these astonishing death masks, thin sheets of gold carefully molded to capture the features of kings and warriors, their hollow eyes staring blankly across millennia. The most famous, the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, wasn't just burial finery. It was a bridge between worlds, a way to ensure the dead wouldn't vanish into anonymity. What's remarkable is how these masks straddle the line between art and ritual. Unlike the idealized portraits of later cultures, Mycenaean masks show individuality. Some bear stern expressions with heavy brows, others softer features hinting at youth. Craftsmen would press the gold over the deceased's actual face, creating a crude but intimate likeness before burial. This wasn't vanity, it was defiance. By preserving the face, the Mycenaeans were making a bold claim. Death couldn't erase identity. The soul would carry its earthly visage into the afterlife, recognizable to gods and ancestors alike. But here's the layer few consider: these masks weren't just about the dead. They were tools for the living. In a time without photographs or mirrors, seeing a loved one's face one last time, preserved in precious metal, may have offered a visceral kind of closure. The gold itself held power. Its incorruptibility symbolized immortality, a physical promise that something of the person endured. Some tombs show evidence that mourners revisited the masks, touching them during later ceremonies, as if maintaining a tactile connection to those who'd passed. The real mystery lies in the mask's imperfections. Many were hastily made with uneven hammer marks and asymmetrical features. This suggests urgency, as if the ritual demanded completion before decay set in. Perhaps the Mycenaeans feared that without this golden shell, the soul might lose its way. Later Greek myths speak of spirits wandering the underworld unrecognizable, doomed to oblivion. These masks, then, were more than memorials. They were passports, ensuring safe passage by preserving the one thing even gods couldn't deny: a name, a face, a story that refused to fade. And then there's the haunting question of what we've lost. The mask of Agamemnon survives, but how many others were melted down by looters, their histories dissolved into ingots? Each one was a testament to a belief that memory could be forged in metal, that gold might outlast flesh in the long conversation between life and what comes after. When we snap photos today to hold onto moments, we're chasing the same desperate hope that against all odds, something of us might remain. On the sun-baked hills of ancient Cyprus, grief took physical form. Rows of delicate terracotta women with tilted heads and hands pressed to their faces, frozen mid-lament. These weren't mere decorations, they were professional mourners in miniature, their hollow eyes perpetually weeping for souls they'd never met. Archaeologists have found them clustered in tombs, some with traces of pigment still clinging to their robes, as if the colors of sorrow hadn't faded even after centuries. But why entrust the work of mourning to clay? The answer lies in their craftsmanship. Unlike generic grave goods, these figurines were sculpted with startling individuality. Some clutch their veils in dramatic despair, while others hunch forward as if bearing invisible weights. A few even cradle tiny drums, hinting at ritual performances meant to guide the dead. Their faces aren't blank, they're studies in controlled agony, with furrowed brows and parted lips that seem seconds away from wailing. This wasn't mass-produced grief. Each statue carried the weight of a specific farewell, a curated expression of loss meant to echo through eternity. What's truly revealing is their placement. These terracotta mourners often surround the deceased like a silent vigil, positioned at the head, feet, or along the tomb walls, strategic points where living mourners would have stood during ceremonies. Some tombs contain dozens, suggesting a community's collective grief materialized in clay. But here's the twist: many were deliberately broken before burial, their shattered limbs carefully arranged around the body. Was this symbolic, a way to release the mourners' spirits once their duty ended, or did the fractures represent the irreversible break of death itself? The practice raises profound questions about the nature of ritual. In a world without photographs, these figurines may have served as emotional proxies, allowing families to outsource the exhausting physicality of grief. Professional mourners were common in Mediterranean cultures, but not everyone could afford their services year after year. Clay, however, never tired. It could weep indefinitely, ensuring no ancestor felt forgotten. Yet there's another possibility, that these statues weren't replacements at all, but amplifiers, conduits to channel living sorrow into the afterlife. The Mycenaeans sent gold masks to preserve faces. The Cypriots sent terracotta tears to preserve feeling. One tomb offers an especially poignant clue. Among the usual mourners sat a single, unique figure, a small child with upturned palms, as if asking a question only the dead could answer. Its presence suggests these rituals weren't just about loss, but about maintaining dialogue across the unimaginable divide. When we today leave flowers or light candles at graves, we're engaging in the same instinctual act, creating tangible expressions for emotions too vast to speak aloud. The mediums change, but the human heart, it seems, has always needed hands to hold what words cannot carry. Scattered across the rugged landscapes of the Western Balkans, the Illyrian tumuli rise like silent earthbound crowns, each one an artificial hill so meticulously constructed it could take a generation to complete. These weren't just graves, they were statements in soil and stone, towering over the living as reminders of those who'd shaped their world. Imagine standing at the base of one of these mounds, its slopes thick with wildflowers, knowing that beneath your feet lay not just bones, but an entire curated legacy. Bronze swords still sharp after centuries, intricately woven textiles, even chariots dismantled piece by piece to accompany their owners into eternity. What makes these tumuli extraordinary is their duality, part memorial, part territorial marker. Some were placed along ancient trade routes, visible for miles like silent sentinels claiming the land. Others clustered near settlements, anchoring the community to its ancestors literally beneath their feet. The effort involved was staggering. Soil wasn't just piled haphazardly. Layers were compacted with ritual precision, often mixed with charcoal or crushed pottery to create distinct colored bands, a visual echo of the underworld's layered realms. And the treasures within, they tell stories without words. A chieftain might be buried with a dozen spears, their tips deliberately bent, a practice known as killing the weapons so they could serve their master in the afterlife. But here's the twist, these mounds weren't static. Many show evidence of later additions, new chambers dug into their sides, offerings placed atop them centuries after their construction. This suggests the Illyrians saw the tumuli as living monuments, places where the past remained accessible. Archaeologists have found traces of feasting near their bases, as if the dead were still hosting gatherings for the living. The arrangement of artifacts is equally revealing. Weapons are often positioned to point toward specific landmarks, a mountain pass, a river confluence, hinting that these burials might have served as spiritual guardians of strategic locations. The most poignant discovery comes from the smallest tumuli. Not all were built for warriors. Some contain women buried with looms or spindles, their mounds adorned with carved stone markers shaped like distaffs. Others hold children surrounded by toys, tiny bronze animals. Gaming pieces suggesting status wasn't the only thing worthy of monumental remembrance. This nuanced approach challenges our assumptions about these cultures. Yes, the grandest tumuli glorified power, but even in death, the Illyrians made space for tenderness. Why go to such lengths? The answer might lie in the land itself. In regions where rocky terrain made farming difficult, dedicating precious soil to burial mounds was a profound act of devotion. Each shovelful was a covenant. The earth would claim the body, but the community would keep the memory elevated, literally rising above the everyday. When we visit cemeteries today, placing flowers where grass meets stone, we're part of that same unbroken chain, humans reaching across time to say, "You are still here with us." The mediums change, but the impulse remains, to build monuments not just to the dead, but to the invisible threads that bind generations. In the catacombs beneath Sicilian cities, death became an artist's canvas. Unlike the Soma crypts of later centuries, these chambers hummed with unexpected vitality, skulls stacked in geometric precision, femurs arranged like sunbursts, pelvic bones forming intricate borders. This wasn't macabre disorder, it was deliberate design, a fusion of mortality and beauty that transformed decay into something almost celebratory. Picture the caretakers of these spaces, working by lamplight to position each bone with the care of a mosaicist laying tiles, turning what could have been a place of horror into a gallery of memory. What's most striking is how personal these arrangements were. Some skulls bear traces of ochre or charcoal, their foreheads painted with symbols, a crescent moon for protection, a spiral for eternity, even rudimentary portraits suggesting the faces these bones once held. In Palermo's Capuchin catacombs, certain niches feature entire families grouped together, their skeletal hands intertwined as if death couldn't sever their connection. Others show bones sorted by type, creating rhythmic patterns that draw the eye upward like the ribs of a sacred vault. This wasn't just storage, it was storytelling, where every placement whispered something about the lives behind the remains. But here's the layer few consider. These ossuaries solved a practical dilemma. In Sicily's rocky soil, burial space was precious. When tombs filled, exhumation became necessary, but rather than discarding the bones, communities honored them through artistry. The act of rearranging was itself a ritual, allowing new generations to physically interact with ancestors, dusting off femurs to place them in fresh configurations. Some scholars believe the patterns held coded meanings. A spiral might represent rebirth, while concentric circles could signify the cyclical nature of time. The painted symbols often aligned with the deceased's profession, a fish for fishermen, a sheaf of wheat for farmers, turning each skull into a tiny biography. The real revelation lies in the emotional calculus behind these choices. In cultures that feared the unquiet dead, decorating bones may have been a way to placate spirits, keeping them content through attention and beauty. Yet the care taken suggests something deeper, an assertion that even in dissolution, people deserved individuality. When we today curate photo albums or arrange keepsakes, we're engaging in a similar act of defiance against oblivion. The Sicilians simply worked with the materials at hand, using what remained to say, "You were here, you mattered." One chamber offers an especially poignant clue. Among hundreds of anonymous skulls, one stands out crowned with a rusted tin diadem, its empty eye sockets lined with flakes of gold leaf. Was this a pauper's mockery of royalty, or someone's final, desperate bid to make a loved one unforgettable? The answer, like so much in these silent galleries, lingers just beyond our reach. Yet the impulse itself is universal, to gild what time would take, to insist that memory can outlast even flesh. Beneath the rolling hills of ancient Thrace, the earth holds a silent pact between warrior and steed noblemen, buried not just with their weapons, but with their horses standing upright, as if frozen mid-gallop toward eternity. These weren't mere sacrifices, they were acts of profound trust, a belief that loyalty could outlast death itself. Picture the scene, a chieftain laid to rest, his prized stallion positioned beside him, its legs carefully arranged to mimic the posture of motion, hooves forever suspended above an invisible road. For the Thracians, horses weren't just companions in life. They were sacred guides, the only creatures worthy of carrying a soul across the final frontier. The scale of these burials reveals their significance. Some tombs contain not just one horse, but entire teams, their skeletons still yoked to ornate chariots with wheels crafted from bent ash wood, a material chosen for its flexibility, as if even the vehicle needed to endure the twists of the afterlife's path. Archaeologists have found graves where the horses wear bridles studded with silver moons, their cheek pieces engraved with spirals symbolizing the sun's journey. This wasn't random decoration, it was a map, a celestial language meant to orient the dead toward their destination. The chariots themselves tell their own stories. Some are stripped of practical function, their axles deliberately broken, a ritual killing of the object to release its spirit for the otherworldly voyage. Others are pristine, laden with amphorae of wine and bundles of herbs, as if packed for a long campaign beyond the mortal realm. But what does this say about Thracian values? Look closer and the answer emerges in the details. Horses buried with women or children are rare but not unheard of, proof that honor wasn't exclusive to warriors. In one poignant grave, a young girl rests beside a pony, its mane still threaded with tiny glass beads. Here, the ritual bends, suggesting that for the Thracians, nobility wasn't just about battle prowess, but about the bonds that defined a life well lived. The inclusion of chariots takes this further. Unlike the solitary rider, a charioteer relies on teamwork, the harmony between human hands and animal strength, a metaphor for the community's role in guiding its members beyond death's threshold. The most revealing clue lies in the horse's positioning. Many face east toward the rising sun, their noses angled as if sniffing the dawn of a new existence. Some show signs of ceremonial feeding before burial, their teeth stained with traces of honeyed grain, a final meal to fortify them for the journey. This wasn't just symbolism, it was practicality meeting spirituality. The Thracians, known for their horsemanship, understood that no steed could traverse unknown realms without sustenance. In their eyes, the afterlife demanded the same preparation as any earthly campaign: provisions, a trusted mount, and the courage to ride into the unknown. Why horses, though? The answer might gallop through Thracian mythology. Their gods were often depicted as riders, straddling the divide between sky and earth. To bury a man with his horse was to grant him the dignity of a deity, to blur the line between mortal and immortal. When Roman historians later wrote of Thracian funerals, they described tumultuous processions where warriors raced chariots around the grave, raising dust to veil the horizon. It was more than spectacle. It was a reenactment of the soul's departure, hooves pounding the earth like a heartbeat fading into the distance. Today, when we lay flowers on a grave or leave tokens for the departed, we're reaching for the same intangible comfort. That love, like those Thracian steeds, might just be strong enough to carry us beyond the limits of this world. The Lydians didn't just mourn their dead, they raced, wrestled, and leaped in their honor. Picture a sun-drenched arena in ancient Sardis, where the air hums not with dirges, but with the slap of sandals on dirt, the thud of bodies hitting the wrestling pit, the roar of crowds cheering as athletes push their limits, all in the name of someone no longer there to see it. These funeral games weren't mere distractions from grief. They were acts of defiance, transforming loss into a spectacle of vitality. And the prizes: woven wreaths, amphorae of olive oil, even livestock, all awarded in the deceased's name, ensuring their legacy lived on through the triumphs of others. What's fascinating is how these games mirrored Lydian values. In a culture that revered both physical prowess and communal bonds, athletic competitions became the perfect bridge between worlds. Winners didn't just earn glory for themselves, they channeled it to the departed, as if their sweat and strength could somehow nourish the soul's journey. Archaeologists have found inscriptions linking victors to specific ancestors, proof that these weren't generic events, but deeply personal tributes. One stele even depicts a chariot race where the winning driver is named alongside the nobleman he honored, their fates intertwined across the boundary of life and death. But here's the layer that resonates. The Lydians saw these games as more than symbolism. They believed physical excellence had spiritual weight. A poem etched on a tombstone near Ephesus describes how the deceased, a retired athlete, had won his final crown through the feats of younger competitors. The muscles straining in the stadium, the breathless finish line collapses, all of it was thought to send ripples through the unseen realms, a kinetic prayer in motion. Even the events themselves held meaning. Foot races symbolized the soul's swift passage, while discus throws mirrored the cyclical nature of existence. Wrestling, with its intimate grappling, may have represented the struggle to hold onto memory. The most revealing detail, though, lies in who participated. Unlike the later Olympics, which excluded women, Lydian funeral games included foot races for girls and archery contests where daughters of the deceased often competed. This wasn't just about athleticism, it was about continuity. When a young woman crossed the finish line with her father's name echoing in the stands, she wasn't just running, she was stitching the past to the future. The games also served as social equalizers. slaves could earn their freedom by winning, and foreign competitors were welcomed, suggesting the Lydians viewed death as a universal language that transcended status. Why connect sports to funerals? The answer might lie in the Lydians' unique worldview. For them, the body wasn't a prison to escape, but a vessel to celebrate. By channeling grief into physical exertion, they affirmed what their culture held dear, that life's fleeting beauty was worth honoring with every panting breath, every straining muscle. When we today dedicate charity runs or tournaments to lost loved ones, we're unknowingly echoing that ancient impulse to turn sorrow into something that moves, breathes, and for a fleeting moment feels alive. The stadiums have grown quieter, but the heart of the ritual remains, to mourn not with stillness but with motion, as if the dead might yet cheer us on from the shadows. High above the turquoise waters of ancient Lycia, the dead kept watch from their stone palaces, not buried in the earth, but elevated in tombs carved directly into sheer cliff faces, their facades mimicking the elegant homes of the living. These weren't hidden graves, they were declarations in rock designed to catch the first light of dawn and the last glow of sunset, as if the deceased were still part of the daily rhythm below. The most striking of these tombs, like the ones at Myra, feature ornate porches with faux wooden beams, delicate columns, even carved benches where visitors might have once sat to converse with those inside. Why go to such lengths to build houses for souls who'd already departed? The answer lies in the Lycians' unshakable belief that death was merely a change of address. To them, a tomb wasn't a final resting place, it was a new residence, and its design reflected the status the person held in life. Wealthy merchants were entombed in multi-story structures with intricate friezes depicting banquets or naval battles, while simpler facades bore the names of craftsmen or farmers. Some tombs even include false doors, meticulously carved to look ajar, as if the occupant could step out at any moment. This architectural devotion reveals a profound intimacy with mortality. The Lycians didn't just memorialize their dead, they housed them, ensuring they remained visible participants in the community's story. But the cliffside locations weren't just about prestige. Positioned high above valleys and trade routes, the tombs served as constant reminders of lineage, their facades acting as silent heralds of family legacies. The higher the tomb, the closer it was thought to be to the celestial realm, a bridge between earth and sky. Archaeologists have found evidence of pulley systems used to hoist sarcophagi into near vertical rock faces, a logistical feat that speaks to the ritual's importance. Even more telling are the reliefs, scenes of the deceased receiving offerings surrounded by ancestors, as if the carvings themselves were windows into an ongoing existence. The most haunting detail, many tombs feature narrow channels cut into the stone, designed to funnel libations directly to the sarcophagus below. Families would pour wine or honey into these openings during festivals, the liquid vanishing into the cliff as if consumed by unseen lips. In some, small cavities held terracotta figurines, servants, musicians, even pets, meant to accompany the dead in their eternal home. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was infrastructure for an afterlife imagined in startlingly domestic terms. What inspired such devotion? Look to Lycia's rugged landscape. With limited arable land, every inch of soil was precious. Cliff tombs freed fertile ground for the living while honoring the dead with prominence no earthbound grave could match. But there's a deeper layer, the stone itself. Lycian limestone weathers slowly, its pale hues resisting time's erosion. By carving homes into these cliffs, the Lycians were making a wager against oblivion, that memory, like rock, might just outlast the elements. Today, when we visit cemeteries with well-tended plots or place flowers on elevated niches in columbariums, we're echoing that same impulse. to keep our loved ones not just in mind, but in sight, their presence anchored to the world they once walked. In the dim recesses of Philistine burial chambers, the dead slept inside faces, not their own ceramic coffins molded into haunting human likenesses, their hollow eyes staring blankly into eternity. These weren't mere containers, they were vessels of identity, each one shaped with crude yet deliberate features. A pinched nose here, a suggestion of lips there, as if the clay itself could stand in for the person it held. Picture lifting the lid of one of these coffins to find not a skeleton, but the ghostly impression of a face gazing back, its expression frozen somewhere between serenity and surprise. What unsettles archaeologists isn't just their appearance, but their intent. Some coffins bear traces of paint-blue eyelids, ochre cheekbones, suggesting an attempt to animate the vessel for its occupant. Others feature perforations near the mouth, perhaps to allow the spirit to breathe or speak. But here's the paradox. While the facial details imply a protective embrace, the heavy clay lids and sealed seams hint at containment. Were these coffins meant to comfort the dead or confine them? The answer might lie in their placement. Many were buried near city gates or crossroads, liminal spaces where spirits were thought to linger. One tomb even held a coffin with its face turned toward the wall, as if averting its gaze from the living, a gesture that could read as reverence or restraint. The craftsmanship reveals deeper cultural tensions. Unlike the idealized death masks of Mycenaean, Philistine coffins often exaggerate features, wide, almost grotesque mouths, elongated chins, as if emphasizing the divide between living and dead. Some scholars argue these distortions were apotropaic, designed to frighten away malevolent forces. Others see them as honest reflections of Philistine diversity, with variations in nose shape and hair texture, possibly representing different ethnicities within their cosmopolitan ports. But the most telling detail, many coffins show signs of reuse. Scratches inside suggest earlier occupants were removed to make space, their bones transferred to ossuaries while the ceramic shell welcomed new tenants. This wasn't careless recycling. It was a belief that the vessel itself held power, its human form a conduit between worlds. When we today debate whether to bury loved ones in family plots or repurpose graves, we're wrestling with the same question the Philistines confronted. How much of a person stays behind in the objects that hold them? Perhaps the answer is written in the clay. One child's coffin discovered near Ashkelon bears tiny fingerprints pressed into its brow, not accidental smudges, but intentional marks, as if a parent had traced their child's features one last time before firing the kiln. In that gesture, containment and care collide. The Philistines may have feared restless spirits, but they also loved enough to give them faces, a paradox as old as grief itself. The Sicilians cradled their dead in the same posture they'd entered life, knees tucked close, hands curled beneath chins, nestled inside towering terracotta jars like seeds waiting to sprout anew. But what makes these Bronze Age burials extraordinary isn't just the fetal position. It's the tiny world packed around each body. Archaeologists lifting the lids of these vessels have uncovered meticulously crafted miniatures, bronze axes no longer than a thumb, clay looms small enough to fit in a child's palm, even delicate replicas of fishing nets woven from threads fine as spider silk. These weren't toys, they were functional blueprints for eternity, insisting that a person's craft would transcend the grave. Among these grave goods, patterns emerge like whispered confessions of sickened values. Blacksmiths rest with Lilliputian anvils and hammers, their tools scaled down but perfectly balanced, as if ready to forge divine metal in some unseen workshop. Farmers clutch ceramic sickles and miniature plows, the blades still bearing traces of ochre paint, perhaps to mimic the rust of honest labor. But the most poignant finds belong to the weavers. Their jars brim with spindle walls and tiny distaffs, some threaded with remnants of actual fiber, as if death had interrupted mid-stitch. One tomb near Agrigento held a woman cradling a palm-sized loom, its warp threads still tensioned after 3,000 years. The message is unmistakable. Skill was soul deep, too vital to leave behind. Why these specific professions? The answer might lie in Sicily's rugged landscape. The prevalence of agricultural tools reflects the island's dependence on wheat and olives, while the abundance of fishing gear along coastal burials speaks to the sea's bounty. But there's a hierarchy at play. Weapons, miniature swords, daggers, even chariot fittings appear almost exclusively in male burials, often paired with tiny whetstones for sharpening blades in the afterlife. Yet in a handful of graves, the lines blur. One jar contained a woman surrounded by both weaving tools and a bronze dagger, her bones showing old battle scars. Was she a warrior weaver, or did the Sicans believe certain skills defied gender even in death? The miniature phenomenon reveals something profound about Sican spirituality. Unlike cultures that idealized leisure in the afterlife, the Sicans envisioned eternity as a continuation of purpose. A baker's jar might hold a thumb-sized oven with charred bread crumbs still clinging to its interior. A potter's grave could contain doll-sized kilns and coils of clay. The care taken in crafting these objects, some detailed enough to show individual stitching on leatherworkers' aprons, suggests they weren't symbolic tokens but functional gear. Perhaps the Sicans feared idleness more than oblivion, trusting that hands meant for creating shouldn't stop just because the heart had. One burial near Sant'Angelo Muxaro offers a haunting clue. The jar held a child no older than 6, surrounded by an entire miniature smithy anvil, bellows, even a pile of ingots cast from lead. The child's bones showed no signs of metalwork. This was aspirational. Had the Sicans prepared the tools for a life unlived, or did they believe the afterlife would grant the chance to become what mortality had denied? The question lingers like the scent of olive wood that still clings to some jars, a whisper of workshops where the dead might yet shape their own eternity. In the river-rich lands of ancient Tartessos, silver wasn't just currency, it was a language. When the elite passed into the unknown, they took with them belts of hammered silver so finely wrought, the metal seemed to ripple like water. Diadems etched with spiraling labyrinths, bracelets incised with symbols that still defy translation. These weren't displays of wealth alone, they were puzzles cast in precious metal, each mark a potential key to a belief system lost to time. The most striking examples, like those found at La Gioia, feature repeating motifs, stylized trees with roots that twist into serpents, crescent moons cradling sun disks, even what might be early forms of the Phoenician alphabet. But here's the mystery. Were these inscriptions prayers, maps, or warnings? The craftsmanship reveals clues. Tartessian silverwork shows an obsession with duality. Sun and moon motifs often appear entwined, while some pendants bear images of fish swimming upward toward birds in flight, as if symbolizing the soul's journey between realms. One particularly ornate belt discovered near Hulva displays a sequence of symbols resembling gates or doorways, each slightly more elaborate than the last. Archaeologists speculate these might represent stages of the afterlife, a metallic roadmap for the deceased. Even more intriguing are the rare instances where silver objects were deliberately bent or broken before burial, a ritual killing of the object to release its spiritual essence, much like the Thracians did with weapons. But the real enigma lies in the symbol's origins. Some mirror those found on Phoenician trade goods, suggesting cultural exchange, while others appear uniquely Tartessian. A recurring zigzag pattern, for instance, has been interpreted as both a representation of local rivers and a metaphor for life's twists. The sheer variety hints at a complex cosmology, concentric circles that might depict celestial orbits, branching lines resembling genealogical trees, even what look like rudimentary musical notation. Without a Rosetta Stone equivalent, we're left to wonder, were these markings sacred texts, ancestral signatures, or perhaps even attempts to capture the voices of gods? What's undeniable is the intimacy of these offerings. Many pieces show signs of wear-thinned edges on bracelets where they rubbed against wrists, smooth depressions in pendants from fingers tracing their shapes. This wasn't treasure hastily gathered for the grave. These were personal talismans worn through lifetimes and deemed too vital to part with in death. Some tombs contain silver needles threaded with gold wire too fragile for practical use, likely meant to mend spiritual rather than earthly fabric. The most haunting find comes from a child's burial near Seville, a tiny silver rattle filled with seeds that still whisper when shaken after 3,000 years. It's a sound that bridges millennia, turning an artifact into an echo. For the Tartessians, silver may have been more than a metal. It was a mirror, reflecting their deepest hopes for what lay beyond the visible world. When we today engrave initials on jewelry or tuck keepsakes into caskets, we're reaching for that same certainty, that some materials are sacred enough to carry love beyond the boundaries of flesh and time. Among the rugged peaks of Sardinia's interior, Nuragic artisans forged tiny bronze boats no longer than a hand, each one a masterpiece of miniature engineering, complete with curved prows, intricate railings, and even miniature oars frozen mid-stroke. These weren't toys or trinkets. They were vessels for the soul, carefully placed in graves as if the dead might need them for a voyage far more perilous than any Mediterranean crossing. The craftsmanship alone speaks volumes. Some boats feature animal-headed figureheads resembling bulls or birds, while others sport circular shields along their sides, suggesting a journey requiring both spiritual and physical protection. But where exactly were these boats meant to sail? The Neuragic people left no written records, but the clues lie in their sacred geography. Many graves containing these models cluster near the island's winding rivers or natural springs, hinting at a belief in underground waterways connecting this world to the next. Some scholars point to later Sardinian folklore, which speaks of a land of the ancestors accessible only by crossing a treacherous river, a motif echoing Greek Styx or Egyptian underworld myths. Yet the Nuragic boats differ in one crucial way. They're not meant for a ferryman, but for the deceased to navigate independently, suggesting a culture that valued self-reliance even in death. The most revealing details are the cargoes. Some boats hold tiny bronze figurines, warriors with raised swords, or animals like deer and boars, as if transporting supplies or companions for the afterlife. One exceptional model from Crete even includes a miniature hearth at its center, its bronze flames perpetually ablaze, perhaps to light the way through dark waters. This wasn't just symbolic, it was practical preparation for an unknown journey. The Nuragic people, skilled sailors who traded across the Mediterranean, likely projected their seafaring reality onto the spiritual realm, death as another expedition requiring provisions, courage, and a sturdy craft. What's haunting is how these models evolved. Early examples are simple, almost abstract, but over centuries they grow astonishingly detailed. Later graves contain boats with removable masts, anchors that actually function, and even tiny fish nets draped over their sides. This progression suggests a deepening belief in the afterlife as a mirrored world where daily activities continued: fishing, trading, exploring. The bronze itself held significance. Its resistance to corrosion may have symbolized the soul's imperishability, while its reflective surface could have been seen as a boundary between realms. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from a child's burial near Abasanta. The The boat inside is smaller than most, but its prow bears a delicate bird with wings outstretched, a creature capable of flying where water couldn't reach. In this tiny detail, we glimpse a parent's hope that their child's journey might transcend the unknown's hazards, finding wings where others needed oars. When we today leave flowers or coins at graves, we're not so different, offering what we can to smooth the passage into the unimaginable. The Neuragic boats simply sailed on metal instead of petals, carrying the same unspoken plea: may the voyage be kinder than the parting. For the Etruscans, the afterlife wasn't just a destination, it was a cosmic equation written in the very organs of sacrificial beasts. Picture a priest in a smoke-filled sanctuary, his hands slick with blood as he turns a freshly removed liver toward the flickering torchlight. Every lobe, every vein, every irregularity in the bronze-hued flesh holds meaning, a divine cipher revealing whether the deceased would find peace or peril beyond the grave. This was haruspicy, an art so precise that centuries later, Roman conquerors would still employ Etruscan diviners to interpret the will of the gods. But for the Etruscans themselves, it was more than prophecy. It was a sacred map connecting individual fates to the machinery of the universe. The ritual's power lay in its duality. Each liver was seen as a microcosm, a mirror of the sky itself, with its lobes corresponding to celestial regions ruled by different deities. A dark spot near the gallbladder might signal the interference of an angry underworld god, while an unusually smooth surface could indicate favor from the celestial ones. Archaeologists have found bronze models of livers like the famous Piacenza liver, divided into 40 sections labeled with godly names, essentially turning anatomy into a spiritual GPS. These weren't random guesses, they were part of a rigorous system where even the gallbladder's position held cosmic significance. But here's what's startling: the animals chosen for sacrifice weren't arbitrary. Sheep were preferred for their docile nature, their livers believed to offer clearer readings, as if tranquility in life translated to legibility in death. The act of sacrifice itself was a performance of cosmic balance. Before the knife fell, the animal was purified with water and grain. Its consent seemingly confirmed. If it shivered, a reaction later Romans would mock as superstitious. The priest then worked swiftly, interpreting the liver before the blood fully cooled, because divinity was thought to linger only briefly in mortal remains. The connection to funerary rites was profound. Wealthy Etruscans often had haruspices perform divinations at burials, using the results to dictate tomb inscriptions or grave goods. A liver showing ominous signs might prompt the family to add protective amulets or alter the burial orientation. Some tombs even contain artistic depictions of the ritual, with priests holding livers aloft like sacred texts. This wasn't just about predicting the afterlife, it was about shaping it, negotiating with the divine through the most visceral of mediums. What does this reveal about Etruscan spirituality? Unlike cultures that saw death as a fixed sentence, the Etruscans believed the afterlife was malleable, a realm where human ritual could still sway divine will. The liver, an organ central to life through its role in blood purification, became the perfect medium for this dialogue. Its complexity mirrored the complexity of fate itself. When we today seek signs in dreams or coincidences after a loved one's passing, we're grasping at that same ancient impulse to find meaning in the chaos, to believe that even in death, nothing is truly written in stone. Or in this case, in flesh. In the shadowy chambers of Minoan tombs, serpents coil around the wrists of clay goddesses not as threats, but as sacred companions for the journey beyond. These enigmatic figurines, some barely taller than a finger, others standing proud as a forearm, share one unshakable feature: snakes twining up their arms, draped over their shoulders, even curling around their crowns like living diadems. The most striking examples, like the famed snake goddess of Knossos, grip the reptiles with an ease that suggests intimacy rather than fear. But why would a creature so often associated with danger become a guardian of the dead? The answer slithers deep into Minoan cosmology. Snakes weren't just animals to these Bronze Age islanders. They were embodiments of transformation. Shedding their skin became a powerful metaphor for rebirth, their ability to move between crevices and cracks mirroring the soul's passage between worlds. Archaeologists have noted how the figurine snakes often form spirals, a shape repeated in Minoan art from labyrinth motifs to ocean waves, symbolizing cyclical renewal. The goddesses themselves offer clues. Some hold snakes aloft as if presenting offerings to unseen powers, while others press them against their bodies, the curves of the reptiles echoing the contours of their breasts or bellies, a visual link between serpentine energy and feminine creative force. The placement of these figurines in tombs reveals another layer. They're rarely found near the body itself, but rather positioned at chamber thresholds or in niches along passageways, as if stationed to intercept malevolent forces. One burial cave near Phaistos held a cluster of snake goddesses at its entrance, their painted eyes still gleaming with traces of gold leaf, forever watching the boundary between light and dark. This strategic positioning hints at a belief that the afterlife's dangers weren't just spiritual, but territorial, that the soul needed guides who knew the hidden paths and could negotiate with whatever lurked in the shadows. But the connection runs deeper than protection. Snakes feature prominently in Minoan rituals involving ecstatic trance and altered states. Frescoes from Akrotiri show priestesses handling serpents amid floating blossoms, their dilated pupils suggesting transcendental experiences. Some scholars propose the tomb figurines represent not just generic goddesses, but specific aspects of a deity who mediated between life and death, a being who could summon the serpent's transformative power to aid the soul's metamorphosis. The reptiles' forked tongues, often meticulously carved, might have been seen as literal bridges between realms, tasting the air of both worlds simultaneously. Perhaps the most poignant detail comes from a child's burial in Malia. The tiny figurine found there lacks the usual elaborate headdress, its snakes instead forming a protective cage around a miniature bird cradled in the goddess's hands. Here, the serpent isn't just a symbol, it's a shelter, its coils creating a sanctuary for something fragile venturing into the unknown. When we today speak of loved ones watching over us, we're reaching for that same ancient comfort, the hope that invisible hands still guide, that even in darkness, something wise and ancient knows the way. The Minoans simply gave those hands a shape and filled them with creatures who knew how to navigate both the undergrowth and the underworld. On the wind-swept plains of ancient Iberia, the dead didn't rest beneath ordinary mounds, they slept inside silent assemblies of stone, their graves encircled by monoliths that reached skyward like frozen sentinels. These weren't random placements, each boulder was positioned with celestial precision, aligning with solstice sunrises, lunar standstills, or the shimmering paths of stars. Picture standing at the center of one of these circles at dawn, watching the first light of midwinter slide between two pillars to strike a carefully placed marker, illuminating the grave for just one fleeting moment each year. This wasn't just burial, it was a conversation with the cosmos, a way to weave the departed into the very fabric of time. What's striking is how these Iberian circles differ from their more famous northern cousins like Stonehenge. While megaliths across Europe often track solar events, Iberian constructions frequently incorporate lunar and stellar alignments, some even mirroring constellations visible only at certain seasons. The circle at Almendas in Portugal, for instance, features stones carved with cup marks that may correspond to star patterns, while the Los Miles complex in Spain aligns its entrance with the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. These weren't just calendars, they were maps of the afterlife, suggesting the Iberians saw death as a celestial voyage requiring cosmic navigation, but the stones held earthly meaning too. Many are sourced from distant quarries, their transportation alone a monumental act of devotion. Some bear faint carvings of daggers or axes, symbols that reappear on grave goods nearby, as if the monoliths themselves were guardians armed against unseen threats. Others show polished surfaces where generations of hands may have touched them during rituals, wearing the rock smooth with reverence, the most haunting detail. Several circles contain empty spaces, deliberately left gaps in the stone rings that align with significant horizons. Were these portals for spirits to pass through, or windows for the living to peer into other realms? The connection between astronomy and ancestry runs deep. At the El Pozuelo cemetery, one cluster of graves lies bathed in moonlight only during the winter solstice, while summer sun illuminates another. This careful choreography implies the Iberians didn't just observe the heavens, they synchronized their grief with it, timing burials or remembrance rites to celestial rhythms. Some scholars suggest the circles acted as antennae, channeling cosmic energy to nourish the dead, while others see them as territorial markers, staking a clan's claim to both land and lineage under the watchful eyes of the stars. Perhaps the most poignant revelation comes from the smallest circles. Nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Morena, modest rings of knee-high stones surround children's graves, their alignments matching Venus's 8-year cycle, a planet often associated with renewal. Here, astronomy becomes intimate, a parent's attempt to link their loss to something eternal. When we today visit graves on birthdays or anniversaries, we're following that same impulse to anchor memory to the turning of time. The Iberians simply carved their reminders in stone and sky, ensuring every sunrise would whisper their loved ones' names. In the quiet corners of Phoenician homes, death wore a face, not a distant memory, but a startlingly lifelike presence. Skilled artisans would mold wet plaster over the features of the recently deceased, capturing every wrinkle, every curve of the lips, even the faint impressions of stubble on a man's chin. Once dried and painted, these masks weren't hidden away in tombs but displayed prominently perched on shelves, mounted near hearths, sometimes even given places of honor at family meals. The effect must have been uncanny, a loved one's visage frozen in perfect stillness, watching daily life unfold as if they'd never left. What's remarkable is how these portraits straddled the line between art and relic. Unlike Egyptian death masks designed for the afterlife, Phoenician creations served the living. Archaeologists have found masks with holes drilled at the temples, suggesting they were once hung or even carried during processions. Some show signs of repeated touching smooth cheekbones, worn edges hinting that families interacted with them physically, perhaps stroking the plaster as they might have once touched the living face. The colors, too, held meaning. Flesh tones were mixed with subtle variations, a rosy flush on the cheeks for vitality, white flecks in the eyes to mimic light reflection, even delicate veining traced in blue beneath the skin. This wasn't mere representation, it was resurrection in plaster, but here's where the ritual takes a psychological turn. The masks weren't static memorials, they were periodically updated. Younger versions might be crafted to replace older ones, adjusting the face to how the family preferred to remember it. Some households kept multiple masks showing different ages or expressions, creating a kind of flip book of memory. In one Beirut excavation, archaeologists uncovered a cache of 5 masks for the same individual, each slightly altered, as if the deceased were aging in reverse. This suggests the Phoenicians understood memory as fluid, and that the dead could evolve in the minds of those who loved them. The masks also played a role in legal and spiritual matters. Written records from Tyre describe inheritances being settled before the face of an ancestor's mask, as if the departed still held authority. At night, oil lamps were often placed beneath them, making the hollowed eyes seem to flicker with life, a practice that may have given rise to later tales of household guardian spirits. Yet for all their presence, these portraits weren't without boundaries. Masks of those who died violently or in disgrace were often buried, their features deliberately blurred before interment. Even in remembering, the Phoenicians acknowledged that some memories needed containment. What does this reveal about their view of death? Unlike cultures that relegated ancestors to the realm of the invisible, the Phoenicians insisted on keeping them literally visible, not as idealized symbols, but as individuals who once laughed, scolded, and loved. The mask's unflinching realism suggests a culture comfortable with death's physicality, unafraid to let the past gaze directly upon the present. When we today frame photographs of lost loved ones or preserve their voice recordings, we're reaching for that same tangible connection, proof that absence doesn't have to mean invisibility. The Phoenicians simply took it further, turning memory into something you could look in the eye. The Illyrians sent their dead into the afterlife with the clatter of plates and the murmur of shared stories, not in silence, but in the warmth of a feast that lingered beside the grave. Archaeologists peeling back layers of earth in the Balkans often uncover something unexpected beneath warriors' swords and bronze ornaments, the remains of lavish meals. Scattered ox bones still bearing knife marks, stacks of ceramic drinking cups smudged with ancient fingerprints, even charred pits where entire boars once roasted. These weren't casual snacks left for the departed. They were full-scale banquets, evidence that mourning for the Illyrians was a communal act, as much about nourishing the living as honoring the dead. What's striking is how these feasts mirrored social hierarchies. Chieftain graves might contain the skulls of a dozen bulls, a display of wealth and sacrifice, while commoner burials hold simpler offerings, a single goat or clusters of freshwater mussels gathered from nearby rivers. The drinking vessels tell their own story. Some are plain, utilitarian wares, but others are imported Greek kylixes with delicate stems, or ornate Thracian horns tipped with silver. This wasn't just about sustenance, it was about symbolism. The quality of the cups, the rarity of the meat, even the arrangement of the bones, everything communicated status, both of the deceased and those who gathered to remember them. But the real mystery lies in the atmosphere. Were these gatherings raucous celebrations of life or solemn rites heavy with grief? A clue comes from the placement of certain graves. Many feast sites overlook sweeping valleys or trade routes, positioned where firelight would have been visible for miles. The strategic locations suggest these weren't private affairs, but public spectacles, a way to amplify both the deceased's legacy and the community's cohesion. Some pits contain broken pottery deliberately smashed after use, a practice seen in Illyrian wedding rituals too. Could death and marriage have shared a symbolic language, both marking transitions celebrated with controlled chaos? The menu itself offers hints. Analysis of residue in cups reveals not just wine, but honeyed meads and herbal infusions with mild psychoactive properties. Seeds found near hearths belong to plants like henbane and mandrake, known for their trance-inducing effects in small doses. This suggests some feasts may have straddled the line between wake and vision quest, where mourners didn't just reminisce, but sought glimpses of the afterlife through altered states. The animal bones complicate the picture further. Many show butchering patterns unlike daily meals, specific cuts reserved for gods in other cultures. or arrangements where skulls face east toward the rising sun. Perhaps the most telling detail is what's missing. Unlike Greek symposia, where drinking cups were often personalized, Illyrian feasting vessels are rarely inscribed. This anonymity speaks volumes. The ritual wasn't about individual mourners, but the collective act of remembrance, a shared cup passed hand to hand, lips touching the same rim where the deceased might have once drank. When the fire burned low and the last stories were told, the Illyrians did something extraordinary. They buried the remnants of the feast with the dead, sealing the memory underground. Not as trash, but as testament that some bonds are so strong, not even the grave could sever them completely. The earth might claim the body, but the laughter, the clinking of cups, the taste of roast meat on a cool night, those belong to the living and to the ages. In the shadowed tombs of Thrace, death wore the face of eternal youth, not the weathered visage a person carried to the grave, but an ageless ideal cast in hammered gold. Unlike the Mycenaean death masks that preserved individual features, sometimes even the wrinkles of a long life, Thracian artisans crafted smooth, serene faces with symmetrical features and closed, almond-shaped eyes. These masks weren't portraits, they were transformations, as if death itself had polished away life's imperfections, returning the soul to its purest form. The contrast is striking. Where Mycenaean gold captures the creases of a warrior's brow or the curve of a king's nose, Thracian masks erase such details. A chieftain who died in his 60s might be immortalized with the flawless skin of a 20-year-old, his lips forever parted just slightly, as if whispering a secret to the gods. Some scholars argue this reflects a belief in death as a restorative force, not an end, but a return to the primeval perfection that existed before life's trials marked the body. The mask's uniformity supports this. Whether male or female, old or young in life, all faces in death became eerily similar, as if the afterlife demanded a single, universal beauty. Yet there's a deeper layer to this idealism. Many Thracian masks were lined with thin sheets of silver on the inner surface, creating a hidden duality: gold for the world to see, silver touching the skin. This juxtaposition of metals might symbolize the tension between mortal and divine, the earthly self shedding its tarnish to reveal a luminous core. The most elaborate examples, like the mask from the Goliama Cosmatka tomb, feature delicate laurel wreaths or solar discs pressed into the forehead, linking the deceased to celestial cycles. It's as if the Thracians were asserting that death didn't just preserve identity, it elevated it, crowning the soul with symbols of timelessness. But why this obsession with youth? The answer may lie in Thracian cosmology. Their myths speak of a primordial hero, Zalmoxis, who achieved immortality through ritual death and rebirth. Gold masks found in women's graves sometimes bear faint traces of red ochre around the lips and cheeks, a cosmetic flourish suggesting vitality, not decay. Even the mask's closed eyes hold meaning. Unlike Egyptian funerary art, where wide open eyes signify vigilance in the afterlife, the Thracians' languid lids imply peaceful slumber, as if death were merely a pause before awakening somewhere brighter. The most haunting detail comes from a child's burial near Shipka. The tiny mask there shows no attempt to age the face, just the same serene youthfulness as the adults. For the Thracians, perfection wasn't something to grow into. It was the original state death restored. When we today airbrush memorial photos or choose youthful portraits for obituaries, we're reaching for that same impossible ideal, not just remembering the dead as they were, but as we wish they could have stayed. The Thracians simply made that wish literal, hammering hope into gold and pressing it gently over the faces of those they loved. carved into the weathered limestone of Lycian tombs, words sharper than any blade warned trespassers to turn back or face consequences far worse than death. These weren't simple epitaphs, they were curses meticulously inscribed to strike terror into the hearts of grave robbers. One particularly chilling example from Xanthos reads, "Whoever disturbs this tomb, may their name vanish from the earth, their children wither like blighted grain, and their bones never find rest." The specificity is striking. This wasn't just about theft, it was about erasure, a total unraveling of a person's legacy in this world and the next. What fueled such ferocity? The answer lies in Lycia's precarious geography. Sandwiched between warring empires, the Lycians knew how easily memory could be obliterated. Their cliffside tombs, though imposing, were vulnerable to looters and invaders. The curses served as psychological armor, weaponizing the one thing even conquerors feared: the supernatural. Some inscriptions invoked local deities like Leto or Apollo, while others called upon chthonic forces, the kind that didn't distinguish between kings and commoners in their vengeance. A tomb near Patara goes further, threatening not just the thief but their lineage for 7 generations, revealing a belief that wrongdoing could echo through time like a curse itself. Yet these warnings weren't just about fear, they were about fairness. Many curses begin with rational appeals. "I built this tomb with honest labor, not from plunder." This suggests the Lycians saw grave robbery as a violation of cosmic order, a theft not just of gold but of dignity. The dead had paid their dues in life, the afterlife was their rightful reward. Disturbing that peace wasn't just criminal, it was sacrilege. Some inscriptions even offer alternatives. Take a coin from the offering tray if you must, but touch nothing else. This nuance reveals a surprising pragmatism beneath the fury. The curses also reflect Lycia's legal sophistication. Unlike the vague threats of other cultures, Lycian inscriptions often read like courtroom indictments, listing precise punishments for specific crimes. Break a funerary statue, your hands would tremble until death. Steal a ring, your own fingers would rot. This exactitude mirrors Lycia's famed federation system, where written laws governed even the smallest disputes. In death, as in life, order mattered, but the most haunting detail: some tombs feature positive curses, blessings for those who honored the dead. "May whoever tends this grave flourish like the olive tree," promises one steel. This duality captures the Lycian worldview. Justice wasn't just punitive but reciprocal. The afterlife, they believed, remembered every debt. When we today speak of resting in peace, we're invoking that same ancient contract, a hope that the departed, and those who respect them, will find equilibrium in whatever lies beyond. The Lycians simply etched that hope in stone, ensuring their warnings and their wisdom would outlast even the most determined thief. In the dim recesses of Philistine tombs, archaeologists have uncovered rows of ceramic jars, not empty relics, but vessels still cradling the faintest traces of barley and yeast after 3,000 years. These weren't storage containers or casual grave goods. They were carefully placed offerings of beer, brewed specifically to slake the thirst of the dead. The Philistines, often remembered as warriors and seafarers, held a quieter belief that the afterlife demanded the same pleasures as the world above, and no journey into the unknown should be undertaken without a good drink in hand. What makes these beer offerings remarkable is their specificity. Chemical analysis of residue reveals not just any brew, but a particular type of spiced beer infused with juniper and figs, a recipe that reappears in temple offerings and elite feasts. This wasn't a generic libation, it was the deceased's favorite, a final toast tailored to personal taste. Some tombs even contain miniature brewing kits, tiny strainers and fermentation vessels, as if the dead might need to whip up another batch in the underworld. The message is clear. For the Philistines, beer wasn't just sustenance. It was a thread of continuity, binding the living and the dead through shared rituals of camaraderie and comfort. But why beer? The answer lies in its dual role in Philistine society. Unlike wine, which was associated with aristocratic banquets, beer was the drink of everyday life, a staple at family meals, harvest celebrations, and even treaty negotiations. By including it in graves, the Philistines democratized the afterlife, ensuring that death didn't erase the simple joys of community. There's also a practical layer. Beer's natural preservatives made it ideal for long-term burial, and its effervescence may have symbolized the breath of life itself. Some jars bear peculiar perforations near the rim, possibly to allow gases to escape during decomposition, a grim but ingenious solution to prevent explosions in the tomb. The placement of these jars tells another story. They're often clustered near the tomb's entrance or arranged in circles around the body, mimicking the seating at a Philistine drinking party. In life, sharing beer forged bonds. In death, it maintained them. One Ashkelon tomb even features a host jar set apart on a small pedestal, its contents chemically distinct, perhaps a stronger brew reserved for the deceased as the guest of honor. This attention to social nuance reveals a culture that saw death as an extension of hospitality, where the departed remained active participants in the rituals that once defined them. The most poignant discovery comes from a child's burial in Gath. Among the typical grave goods sits a tiny jug, its residue analysis showing a sweeter, lower alcohol brew, likely a beginner's beer given to children during festivals. In including it, the parents extended a gesture both tender and profound. Even in loss, their child wouldn't be excluded from the communal cup. When we today leave bottles of whiskey or favorite snacks at gravesides, we're echoing that same impulse to offer not just reverence but remembrance of who the person was in life. The Philistines simply knew what every good bartender understands. Sometimes the deepest connections are forged over a shared drink, and not even death should break that tradition. Deep beneath the sun-baked hills of ancient Sicily, the Sicans left behind whispers in ochre and charcoal, elaborate cave paintings stretching across damp stone walls, not to celebrate life, but to illuminate death's labyrinth. These weren't mere decorations, they were intricate roadmaps for the soul, depicting perilous rivers teeming with serpentine fish, towering gatekeepers wielding curved blades, and shadowy figures offering cups of unknown liquid. One particularly vivid scene near the Grotta dei Cavalli shows a procession of stick-figure souls crossing a bridge made of spines, their arms raised toward a radiant figure whose hands drip what might be stars or tears. Were these warnings, instructions, or something far more profound? A visual liturgy to guide the terrified dead through realms no living eye had seen. The painting's placement is telling. They cluster near burial chambers but never inside them, as if the knowledge they held was too potent to confine. Some appear in sequences with recurring motifs, a spiral path ascending a cavern wall, a boat manned by skeletal oarsmen, a flock of birds whose wings morph into grasping hands. The Sicans seem to believe the afterlife wasn't a single destination, but a gauntlet of trials requiring preparation. Red pigment, often made from iron-rich clay, dominates scenes of danger, while white calcite marks moments of respite, suggesting a color-coded system for navigating the unseen. But the true revelation lies in what's missing. Unlike Egyptian or Greek underworld depictions, there are no clear gods or judgment scenes, just landscapes of eerie ambiguity. A painting in the Grotta del Genovese shows a figure caught mid-fall between two cliffs, their body segmented like a broken doll. Is this a caution against missteps in the afterlife, or a depiction of the soul's fragmentation before rebirth? The absence of written records forces us to speculate, but the caves themselves offer clues. Many feature narrow tunnels branching off from the painted chambers, their walls scored with deliberate grooves. Archaeologists have found traces of torches in these passageways, suggesting rituals where the living physically retraced the painted journeys, perhaps to rehearse their own eventual voyages or to commune with those who'd gone before. The most haunting detail emerges when you study the paintings under flickering light. Some figures appear static at first, but with movement, hidden layers surface. A warrior's spear becomes a winding route. A floating island transforms into a clenched fist. This kinetic ambiguity hints at a sickened belief that the afterlife was fluid, its dangers and rewards shifting like smoke. A child's burial near a cave entrance adds poignancy. The surrounding paintings include small, crudely drawn hands superimposed over the professional artwork, as if a grieving parent had added their child's likeness to the cosmic map. Why go to such lengths? The answer might lie in Sicily's volatile landscape. Earthquakes and volcanic activity made the Sicans intimately familiar with sudden collapse, both literal and metaphysical. Their cave paintings weren't just art, they were contingency plans for the soul. When we today leave written letters in caskets or record farewell videos, we're attempting a similar feat, trying to pack love and guidance into vessels meant for uncharted terrain. The Sicans simply used the most enduring canvas they knew. Stone, torchlight, and the unwavering human need to believe that no one walks the dark alone. The Mediterranean was never just a body of water. It was a vast, liquid crossroads where cultures traded more than goods. They exchanged ideas about death itself. From the beer offerings of the Philistines to the golden masks of Thrace, a common language of mourning emerged, shaped by the sea's relentless rhythms. Geography didn't just influence these rituals, it dictated them. Coastal cultures like the Minoans saw death as a voyage, stocking tombs with miniature boats and painting murals of dolphins leaping into the unknown. Inland societies like the Iberians turned to the earth's hidden veins, burying their dead in caves where stalactites dripped like celestial clocks, marking time for those who'd slipped beyond it. Food became the great unifier. Whether it was the Etruscans' feasts with bronze platters or the Sicans' honey-drizzled offerings, nourishment transcended borders. The logic was universal. Hunger didn't end with the last breath, but the menu was local. Olive oil flowed in Cretan libations, reflecting an island where trees were sacred. In Sardinia, where pastures stretched farther than vineyards, cheese and milk appeared in graves. Even the containers spoke of place. Phoenicians used amphorae designed for sea trade, while mountain-dwelling Illyrians buried their dead with rugged wooden bowls. The dead ate what the living cherished, a culinary passport to the afterlife. Protection took forms as varied as the landscapes. Coastal peoples warded off evil with sea-inspired amulets, shark teeth in Sicily, cowrie shells in Cyprus. Highland cultures like the Nuragic forged bronze giants, their towering stone sentinels mirroring the jagged peaks around them. And then there were the thresholds, Lycian cliff tombs positioned above pirate routes, Thracian mounds guarding fertile valleys. These weren't random placements. They anchored the dead to the living world's most vulnerable points, turning ancestors into eternal guardians of harvests, trade, and memory. Memory itself was the deepest thread. The Phoenicians' plaster masks preserved faces. The Tartessians' silver inscriptions etched names into eternity. But the methods were dictated by environment. In timber-rich Thrace, wooden effigies stood in groves, ephemeral as the forests that birthed them. On arid Malta, where trees were scarce, people carved memories into limestone, crafting temples that doubled as communal graves. The Mediterranean's geology became its grief language, soft clay for portraits in places like Cyprus, unyielding granite for monoliths in Corsica, the most striking connection. Adaptability. When the Philistines migrated to Canaan, they swapped their Aegean-style chamber tombs for local clay sarcophagi, but kept their spiced beer tradition. The Etruscans, sandwiched between Alps and sea, blended Celtic cremation rites with their own banquet customs. This wasn't mere borrowing. It was the pragmatism of a region where tsunamis, droughts, and invasions made survival synonymous with change. The dead, it seems, were carried on the same currents that shaped the living, their rituals as fluid as the tides, as enduring as the shorelines that held them. These 25 forgotten rituals reveal something extraordinary, that across the fractured landscapes of the ancient Mediterranean, humanity's response to death was as diverse as its cultures, yet bound by a common thread of devotion. From the Etruscans who set banquet tables for their ancestors to the Nuragic people who entrusted souls to bronze boats, each tradition reflects a profound truth. How we say goodbye says everything about how we value life. The pre-Roman world didn't just bury its dead. It built bridges to them, whether through honey poured into Minoan libation tunnels or Thracian gold masks that smoothed away life's scars to reveal an ageless face beneath. What's haunting isn't just the creativity of these rituals, but their intimacy. The Phoenician plaster masks molded directly from the faces of the departed, or the sickened children buried with miniature tools for trades they'd never lived to practice. These weren't grand public spectacles. They were private acts of love, as tender as the Illyrian feasts where mourners shared cups across the grave, or the Iberian caves where bodies curled like seeds waiting to sprout. Even in societies separated by sea and mountain ranges, the same impulse emerges to keep the dead close, not as ghosts, but as participants in an unbroken conversation. Yet these traditions also speak to shared fears. The Lycian tomb curses, threatening thieves with generational ruin, or the Philistine beer offerings meant to fortify souls for an uncertain journey. They reveal how deeply the living feared abandonment, oblivion, or worse, a restless afterlife. The Mediterranean's cultures may have disagreed on what awaited beyond death, but they agreed on one thing: it was worth negotiating. Whether through Tartessian silver inscribed with cryptic maps or Sicilian ossuaries where bones became art, they turned grief into something tactile, something they could shape with their own hands. Perhaps the most striking revelation is how many of these rituals still echo today. When we leave flowers on a grave, we're not so far from the Minoans pouring honey into the earth. When we photograph loved ones, we mirror the Phoenicians' plaster portraits. Even our wakes, with their food and stories, carry whispers of Etruscan feasts. The tools have changed, but the heart remains the stubborn refusal to let death sever connection completely. So which ritual lingers in your mind? The Sardinian giant standing guard over forgotten heroes, or the Mycenaean gold masks preserving faces for eternity? Maybe it's the Thracian horses forever poised to gallop into the afterlife, or the Lydian funeral games where grief transformed into Olympic fire. Whatever resonates, it's a reminder that history's most powerful lessons often come wrapped in silence, in the objects left behind, the art made for unseen eyes, the love poured into vessels meant to outlast time itself. If these forgotten farewells teach us anything, it's that while civilizations rise and fall, the human heart, in all its messy, hopeful brilliance, remains the same. Now it's your turn. Share which ritual moved you most in the comments, and let's keep the conversation alive. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden stories, because the past isn't just a collection of dates. It's a mosaic of lives, loves, and legacies waiting to be rediscovered. Until next time, keep